the strange remainder of sedevacantism, the seda as in sedentary, and the second part of the word meaning vacate, as regarding the sitting Pope to be, the seat of the Pope to be vacant. So this this potential in the Catholic system to challenge the sitting Pope has been exercised by an American priest called Altmann, who's I take to mean old man in German, in no uncertain terms. So he's made a quite a vehement speech. He's mentioned, for instance, that if the Dalai Lama were to present himself as the Pope, who couldn't accept that because he's a Buddhist. So the point he's making is we can't accept. So he doesn't call him Pope Francis anymore. He calls him Bergoglio, which was his name before assuming the bishopric of Rome, and on the basis of saying he's not a Catholic. So that's the strict nature of the sensu stricto. This is the claim. He's claiming Pope Francis is not a Catholic. So that would be a point of punctilio, I would say. There is he correct to immediately say to strip a standing Pope of his proper name as Pope Francis, and to on his own, instead of through the Catholic organization, to present the result as though he were correct. So I don't know, that's the point of doctrine. So I mean, in other words, he should still continue to say Pope Francis is not a Catholic, but instead he says Bergoglio is not a Catholic. He's already stripped him of his vacated the seat. He's already vacated the seat. But okay, in the light of this, it's made me think how the Catholics have been dominated and, in recent years, so Vatican II, charmed by the liberal culture. So one manifestation of liberal culture is nationalism. Perhaps it's a very essential manifestation. But nationalism itself is a bewildering, exciting, riddlesome, and multiplex issue. Some forms of it's so peculiar. Each actual instance of nationalism is very peculiar. In general, we could sort of say some forms are about throwing off an oppressive power and declaring them to be foreign aliens and 12-foot tall mantis men, as some Americans think of the CIA, or certain heads of the CIA, which of course wouldn't be the public PR people, but would be the deep career people who aren't soliciting to be on television shows because they don't need to sell their position, they just do it. To use a somewhat corny phrase. So Gandhi's Quit India movement would be an example of that during World War II. Put an end to the Raj, upset the British Empire, and so on. When Trump and Reagan, when the Trump-Reaganite sort of thing talks about populism, this has the smell of nationalism, and its sense is something like there was a happier time in America. Let's get back to that. And this is a very splintered and contentious issue amongst the Trumpers themselves, because there's part of the Trumpers are consciously pre-Reaganite, wanting to go back before the 60s. These are called the paleo-conservatives. David Duke, for example. And then there's a totally different version, which is the libertarians and the Federalist Society types, and the John Yoo, for example, and the Torquemada Yoo, and people who are more like respectable version of conservatives at the and then above that you see somebody like Richard Epstein, or people that are more serious. These kind of defenders of Trump fall into a certain nationalist spirit, in the sense they think the nation must be preserved. The nation's a great thing, it must be preserved at all costs, even if it means rising above principle, as Richard Epstein sometimes says. This is the kind of Ciceronian version of conservatism, I think. And Richard Epstein is a great scholar of the Roman law, as it were, accidentally. Then there's nationalism in this sense of a pride movement. Like, that's the Nazism is like that. It's like to have this had this idiot acquaintance who was a Japanese American. He's always kind of being accused of being a Japanese supremacist, because he keeps saying, oh, the Japanese Americans are the best Americans, and so on. And I have an issue of being in the it's a terrible thing. I'm not saying that, but they say, instead of saying the internment camps, Japanese Americans like to say concentration camps, in order to say we can't give any more. It's on equal. It's like as though it were equal to places where people were killed. Now, of course, a couple people I think did die in the internment camps, and they were put in cattle cars, and it was very bad. But I think everybody must admit to being stripped of one's property, put in a cattle car, humiliated, frightened, and so on, is very bad, but it's not the same as being killed. And in addition, all the rest that being done to you. So there's a difference there. I think that should be admitted. And the kind of nationalism which is based on pride is the kind of nationalism which begins not to observe facts that it doesn't like. There's something irrational in it. There's other forms of nationalism. For instance, so 1848 is the big nationalist heavy gravity moment, but in 1868 that hit Japan, Meiji Restoration Japan, and everybody the education switched so that everybody was told be loyal to the emperor and love Japan. And then this led to the kamikazes and so on. I know there's all this is the way of the samurai and all these things, but it's just a fact that we could look at how the education changed in 1868. We could look at the policies changed. It's very similar to what happened in Ukraine after the Americans promised the brave new world of capitalism under, I believe, Jeffrey Sachs, but I might be kind of naive, but I believe him when he says he wasn't really pushing the shock therapy, even though he once said that, but that rather, it's actually much worse, it's much more dark, is that what he said is, even though he's everywhere blamed for that, what happened was he had a good economic policy in Poland, which was working. And then he went to the hegemon, and he said, or to some ambassadors to the hegemon, he said, my policy worked in Poland, now let's do it also in Russia. And they said, no, Russia is our enemy. So they did it deliberately. I think that's what happened. I think Sachs is telling the truth about that. You also have an element where the nationalism takes the form of people like Robert Kagan, and on the other side of the practical side, the people that are being called the deep state, which would be people like the guy that ran the South American branch of the CIA when the Pinochet was put in power, in order to make sure that Chile didn't go like Castro over to the point where they expelled all the business interests from the state and seized upon all the best assets for the state. The point was they could have then a legitimate rival. If a bunch of states in South America would become communist and then become partners with Castro and with some other states, then they would form a legitimate rival bloc. So the point is, the domino theory in its practical ramifications means staging coups and making sure that you have capitalism in every country, preferring it to be a liberal capitalism, but preferring also authoritarian capitalism, Singapore capitalism or something, to no capitalism at all. But the reason is not the Noam Chomsky reason. Noam Chomsky is, in my opinion, severely he has a form of racism where he projects the inner motivations of all kinds of people, assumes what they're all about, and wrongly. And he makes them into vermin. He says these are the greedy people, these are the ones that want to secure their power at all times. No, that's not the truth. And we should face up to the truth. It's more human to face up to the truth. It's pathetic to be as Chomsky is and show the other people in rather the tragic light that they should appear in this Manichaean light, that degrade them and make them into vermin. But because the reality is, what the people that have this motive of installing Pinochet is something like the domino theory, and the domino theory means something like we remembered the situation in World War II where there were two hegemons and it could have gone either way, and the Allies ended up defeating the Axis power. So we remember that the two hegemons and the rest is a situation which can arise, and if it arises, then it means all bets are off. And so therefore we have to avert this, even if, a lot of people don't like it. Even if Amnesty International doesn't like it and so on. So I think that shows a number of ways to sort of chart the issue. in connection to the philosophy of nationalism, which we see in a certain way, in a very nice way that plugs us into the philosophic tradition in Giovanni Gentili's statement on the doctrine of fascism. So if we go there, then we see how Hegel plugs in to the doctrine of fascism, because Giovanni Gentili was basically a Hegelian working with Mussolini. He came out with this statement in, I think, 1932. Mussolini had already had some parts of it through his practice, political practice before that. And in that way, just to quote what I always quote is, all unseen the threads were knit together in an infinite combination forms, which is to say, through Hegel, then we're linked to everybody, right? To Heidegger, to Bertrand Russell, to Carl Jung, who said Heidegger was banal as hell, to everybody, because everybody's commented on Heidegger, right? Everybody's commented on Hegel, but that links us to a specific political, historical situation, as it would be called, since Hegel. Okay.